Thank you. This is the first time that I've done a talk in front of people for like a year. It's so weird. I'm so used to doing this in my bedroom. Or actually, I did a whole bunch in my bathroom because it was late at night and I didn't want to wake anyone up. So that was an interesting experience. So I know we did an acknowledgement of country, but I would like to kind of do my own and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land we meet on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I know we do these kind of acknowledgements of country as kind of a matter of course, but I want to just draw our attention to this really beautiful word that we tend to use, custodians. So the word custodians comes from the Latin custos, which means guardian. And I can't help but think that maybe if we all thought about ourselves, if our leaders thought about ourselves as guardians of this earth, we might not be here talking about eco-anxiety. So I would like to pay my deep respects to the elders of the past who have loved this land and have looked after it, as well as the ones of the present and of the future who are fighting for it. So we're going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff tonight. And normally people would say, hey, it's not the end of the world. But that is kind of what we're actually talking about. Yes, it is. Now, I promise I'm not going to sit here and make you really sad with statistics about melting polar ice caps or hungry polar bears. I'm going to presume that all of you know that. And if by chance there is a Murdoch journalist here, I will give you a one-on-one consultation outside where I have a hungry polar bear waiting. Now, I got a nice introduction before, but experiential futurist is a very interesting term. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll know what that means. But I wanted to also tell you 3 things about me that are going to come out in this talk, whether I like it or not. The first one is I have kids. I have 2 small children, and as a parent of 2 small children, I will talk about them relentlessly, so apologies in advance. The second thing is I like pineapple on pizza. You can judge me if you want, but I stand by my choice. And the third thing is I have eco-anxiety. And I want to put that right up at the front of this talk because I'm not going to stand here and say that I have any easy answers for you. Sometimes my eco-anxiety finds me in Woolworths in the drink aisle wanting to cry because I think that there's only 10% of these plastic bottles that are ever going to get recycled. But then sometimes my eco-empowerment leads me to having conversations with the Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Sydney or doing a talk like this. But I do think I have something interesting for you guys tonight because I've spent the last few years researching and studying and really thinking about how we think about the future. And the short story is not very well. So my first question for you guys is, who has a treadmill at home that is more of a clothes horse than a treadmill? Or a kombucha mother or sourdough starter that is looking a little bit more like a science experiment than anything edible? Yeah, got some hands. What about a big stack of books next to your bed that there is no way you were ever going to read? Yeah, okay, yeah, right. Me too. And this is because we have a really weird relationship with our future selves. So studies have shown that when we think about ourselves, the front of our brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, lights up like a Christmas tree. If we think about something we don't know, there's no activity. At a certain point, when we think about ourselves into the future, all the activity goes away. And what we can really take from this is that we lack empathy with our future selves. And this leads to 2 kind of problems. The first one is that we have these unreasonable expectations of ourselves, like the aforementioned library books or the library of books. And the second thing is that we tend to push problems of the present onto the shoulders of our future selves. And this is a process called temporal discounting. You can use that in some kind of quiz maybe sometime. And this temporal discounting means that we tend to make decisions on very short time horizons, even when we know that there can be really significant consequences in the future. In lots of old articles, they talked about smoking. I would also add scrolling is probably the new smoking, in that we know that there can be really damaging health, mental health, physical health in the terms of smoking consequences, yet still we do it. And this is because we're getting a really small reward that we can feel. And that consequence is not specific to us. We know there may be a consequence, but we don't know whether it will happen to us. So this allows us to engage in the process of denial. Now, another way to kind of look at this is to think about what our brains have to do. So while I'm talking to you right now, the two hemispheres of your brain, one of them is listening to me, and the other one, unbeknownst to you, is constantly scanning your environment for threats. And it's getting so much information that it needs to prioritize what threats it takes action on. So there's a researcher in the field of affective foresight called Daniel Gilbert who identifies these threats as immediate, observable, the ones that cause moral outrage, and ones that are social, ones that have a face. And these are the ones that we tend to prioritize. Now, if we look at what all these things have in common, they're mostly experiential, right? We can see them. We get a feeling of anger when we get morally outraged. And that's because we also have this quirk in our brain, which is we will always prioritize the experiential information processing system over the analytical one. Now, Daniel Gilbert in his article wrote something that I thought he probably thought it was quite funny. I'm not sure if it's really that funny, which said, the problem with climate change is it doesn't have a mustache. Yeah, I know, that was a nice laugh. But I think Daniel Gilbert wrote this a while ago because in the last 18 months we have seen catastrophic fires, we have seen floods, and we've seen a plague. So I think that experiential mode of feeling about climate change is with us. But there's a problem with this as well, which is that this whole notion of temporal discounting increases with stress. So when we're stressed, our field of view narrows. We stop thinking about the future. We just think about what's in front of us and we act kind of out of emotion. It's why, when I was getting ready to come tonight and my little 2-year-old is like getting his pasta sauce and smearing it all over the walls, I'm not going, oh, sweetie, please don't do that. I'm like, stop it! But I'm not thinking about the consequences of me yelling at my child. I mean, if I yelled at him all the time, I might create another AM radio host, and really, we don't need any more of them. So I promise I will try and do better. I tried to find some statistics for tonight on how stressed Australia was, whether anyone had done a big survey, but they haven't because I guess everyone is too stressed. But their Headspace did a really good study about young people, so I've got some stats for that. And in a quite frighteningly high number, 34% of young people said that they experienced high levels of stress in the last year. And I get it. I mean, Zoom, seriously, that is stressful enough, let alone all of these other things that we've been through. And I guess the question that comes to my mind is, if we know what's going to happen with climate change, if we know that we're in for more extreme weather events, when are we not going to be stressed? When are we going to have time to think about the future? Well, right now. Because really, you can't invite a futurist to any talk without getting them to say, close your eyes and think about the future. But I am going to do that. You don't need to close your eyes. It's entirely optional. But I want you to think about the future. I want you to put yourself there and think about, where are you? What clothes are you wearing? How are people getting around 10 years into the future? If you're a clever clogs, you can think about what system of government we have, potentially a different one. And I'm guessing that most of you found that pretty hard. And if you think about it, it is hard. I mean, you need a lot of imagination to come up with a whole world, because the only thing we really know about the future is that it's going to be different from today. It takes a lot of brain power. So our brain kind of takes these shortcuts. So who here had a really clear idea of what they were wearing? Anyone? Okay, no one. Well, if you did, I imagine that you kind of reached for costumes from science fiction films or TV shows, or you reached for something that you'd seen on a runway or something. And that's because that's what we do. We kind of take these images that are in the cultural consciousness and we kind of ingest them into what we think about the future. And that's because we just don't have time. I mean, everyone's doing their jobs, everyone's stressed. We don't have time to think about the future. I mean, some people do. I do. I spend my entire life thinking about the future, my entire working life. And other people do, like TV directors and, fashion-forward designers and stuff like that. But there's also another group of people that think about the future a lot. And they're people who are going to make money with their ideas for the future and pushing them into the cultural consciousness. So did anyone imagine something about how you were getting around, how people were engaging with transport? Any ideas? Any autonomous vehicles? Solar panel cars, I love it. Okay, a lot of people talk about, when I ask them, autonomous vehicles, flying cars, the Jetsons, that kind of stuff. And the thing is that we all could have just as easily imagined really awesome public transport, or bicycles, or skateboards, or cities that you want to walk around. But the thing is, there's no kind of agenda to push these images forward. The kind of voices that are loudest are the ones that are pushing these white, shiny futures and that people are making money out of. Now, another thing that's interesting about this is that these images of the future that we see that are in the cultural consciousness come together to form what we call a dominant narrative. And there's 4 dominant narratives when it comes to thinking about the future. There's continual growth, constraint, which I'm sure you can guess what that is, collapse, I think we can all guess what that one is, and transformation. Now, if we think about it, we pretty much live in this world where continual growth is the dominant narrative, right? And we kind of all sort of believe that at some level, like the standard of living is going up, GDP is going up, everything is just growing, and we kind of have this expectation that everything will keep kind of growing. But when we kind of really look at the statistics and stuff, we can kind of see that it's not really true. I mean, wages go up, but purchasing power doesn't, and it's kind of hard sometimes to disengage like a big social thing like standard of living going up, because as we get older, we tend to get more experienced in our jobs, we tend to earn more money, so we kind of lose a bit of perspective. And if we think about technology is always making things better, I mean, everyone's got a Roomba now, we don't have to vacuum, that's amazing. But we also kind of think about the fact that, we're on our phones all the time, we've got severe mental health issues from social media, we're contactable all hours. Zoom, come on, like it's not making life easier. Now, we can see the power of these stories when the stories change. So say, for example, if we go into a recession, the story changes, right? The story is not that the economy is still growing. The story is that the economy is going to contract. And people change their behaviour quite dramatically. People stop buying unnecessary things. They start repairing things. They start delaying conspicuous purchases that will, make their neighbours who've just lost their jobs pretty sad. And there's a really interesting field that I'm not going to bore you with, but it's called narrative economics. I encourage you to read it. It's very interesting. So we can see that these stories change. But really, if we think about it, the dominant story of our time is this one of continued growth. Well, except it isn't, right? Because we're not here if we think the world is going to keep growing. But as I said, there's a narrative for that as well, collapse. So if we think about eco-anxiety, if we think about what anxiety is a worry or a fear about the future, of what's to come. And in particular, it's a worry or a fear that the future we're going to get is not that bright, shiny white one with robots that we've been sold. That it's this future where we're not going to take enough action on climate change, the world is going to heat up, and we are going to watch our beloved species die one by one, the lions and the tigers and the bears, until it's us. Now, this is a horrible future to imagine. And as far as we know, we're the only species that can imagine the future. And it's awesome. Like, it's a really awesome tool to be able to do it, because it means we can share our visions for the future. It means we can work towards things together. But it's awful when we imagine things not working out. So we have this amazing mechanism called denial. Now, I want to tell you my denial bubble bursting story. It came in 2 parts. So the first part was really analytical. So I was studying futures, I was reading an IPCC report on climate change, I was holding my tiny baby son in my arms, and I suddenly went, oh my God, he is going to be the same age that I am in 2050. And I went, will he even have a child? Will he want to have a child? And that felt terrible, especially when you're sleep deprived. The second one was experiential, and I think a lot of people here can probably relate to this. And it was the fires. Because there's nothing that kind of puts into your mind ideas of apocalyptic doom, the not being able to see the sky for days and weeks on ends, or these images of like tornadoes of fire and animals running away and people losing their homes and their communities and their lives. Like, I get it. It's terrifying. It was terrifying. And so I understand why some people go from denial of the problem to denial that there's even a solution. But that's not going to help us. So how do we take action when we feel like this? When we feel like it's a problem that's so big we'll never solve it? Well, like I said, I don't have easy answers, but I have some ideas. And my first one is breathe, because you kind of need to do that. But also because it's kind of interesting. So I want you to take a breath now. It's kind of funny because you would have taken a breath anyway, but take a breath and think about it. So every time we inhale 25 sextillion molecules of oxygen. This means that in the course of a day, in all likelihood, you could be inhaling a molecule of oxygen that has been breathed in by every person that's ever lived. That is nuts, right? That's wild. But let's go even further than that. Let's think, what else in the world has conspired to help us breathe? I mean, the sun, the weather, trees and plants are helping us breathe. I've got to tell you this funny story. So, sorry, I said I was going to talk about my children, and yes, I am. So it was around Christmas time. I was walking around with my son, and he says, "Mummy, why did we decorate Christmas trees?" And I was like, "I don't know." But you can't say that to like a 2-year-old. So I went, well, we decorate Christmas trees because trees are amazing, because they clean the air and they help us breathe. And he took that, and what I secretly love about it is sometimes I catch him walking past a tree going, "Thank you." And this is what I want to talk about next, which is this idea of gratitude. So when we feel gratitude, we do two things. We appreciate something outside of ourselves, which makes us mindful, which is good for us. And we also attribute that good feeling to someone or something. And this attribution makes us see that we are dependent on things, that we are part of something, that we belong to something. And that sense of belonging is amazing. And it's the very opposite of the feelings of guilt that we often feel when it comes to climate change. Now, I want to talk about guilt for a second, because I feel a lot of guilt, I forget my keep cup, guilty. I took the car because it's raining, guilty. I told the family that the pineapple just came on the pizza, guilty. And this guilt sometimes is really good because it makes me feel uncomfortable and it makes me change my behavior. But if I'm not feeling so good, if I'm feeling anxious, it can lead me into a shame spiral, as my students call it. And this doesn't lead to anywhere good. It's kind of the opposite of that feeling of belonging. So I've started to look at my guilt in a different way. I've started to think that my guilt is a sign of my love. If I didn't love this planet, I wouldn't feel guilty. And love is a really great emotion because it can buoy us up, it can make us feel empowered. But I also can't talk about love without talking about pain, right? Because if you really love something and it's at risk, if you're watching it and seeing that it's threatened, you can feel a really profound grief and pain. And I want to say something pretty controversial here, which is I don't want you to let go of that pain, because if you let go of that pain, you do something that we call rational distancing. It means when you understand that there's a problem, but you just shut your feelings off, you just feel numb. And again, that doesn't help anyone. So instead, I want you to think about that pain as a sign of your love. The word courage is derived of two French words, cœur and rager, or heart, anger. And I think that's a really important thing to hold on to, that our love and our pain can sometimes give us courage. But I also get sometimes it's hard to be courageous. So in these moments, I go and I be with my love. I don't turn away. So for me, I've got lots of favourite places in the world, but the easiest one to get to is the Blue Mountains. There is something about watching these waterfalls that just spit these rainbows, like pow, 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 like this, they're no big deal. It's amazing. Or seeing these trees that are so big and so old, I feel like they're looking down at me and going, you silly humans, what are you doing? And it inspires another emotion in me. It inspires awe. And awe is a really cool emotion because awe makes us think about vastness. It kind of disrupts our mental models. It makes us quieten down our self-interest and our ego. And it kind of makes us sit and go, look what you're a part of. It's amazing. And it is amazing. It's this intricate, amazing, beautiful ecosystem that is on this small, tiny blue dot in a solar system that just so happened to have this miracle where we had these conditions for life. And if we think about what our planet has gone through in those millions of years, it's seen some amazing transformations from, single-cell amoebas to animals to dinosaurs. We have to mention the dinosaurs. My son will be very upset if I don't mention dinosaurs. And then to us. And that's some pretty great transformations. But I like to think maybe the greatest transformation is the one that's yet to come, the one that we might drive. So you know how I said there were those 4 different futures? So there was continual growth, constraint, collapse, and transformation. And maybe that's the one we've got to aim for, transformation. Now, I mentioned evolution. I want to go back to that for a second because a phrase that kind of springs to mind for a lot of people is survival of the fittest. But it's really been co-opted by people to kind of take it to mean that survival of the fittest is about animals competing with each other. But it's not. Survival of the fittest is about transformation. It's about the fittest. The fittest actually is who can transform the best, who can adapt to their environment, who can transform and create different behaviors, who can transform themselves. And if we look at evolution, we kind of see that most of these transformations are cooperative. They're not competitive at all. Now, in society, we are also constantly transforming what we see as normal. I mean, we've seen recently the Black Lives Matter, Me Too, we've had victories with marriage equality. And these things haven't happened overnight. They've taken decades of really hard work from a lot of people. But it's we can't really see that transformation happening, and we don't really want to. Because if you think about it, in a way, it's compromising to think about that. It's compromising to think that the mainstream once thought in a way that now is not considered normal. So I guess I want to say change is happening. This movement is building. We just need to keep going. And sometimes it feels the darkest before the dawn. I think I'm quoting Florence and the Machine, and I apologise, sorry. So how do we keep going? Well, we go back to those things that we learned. We reject those used futures that other people have given us, and we have some empathy with our future selves. So to reject those futures that are given to us, we need to build our own. And to do this, we can look for weak signals around us. Here's a couple. So my shoes, I'm not sure if you can see them, kind of cool. They're made from used coffee grounds and 6 recycled plastic bottles. Rad, huh? Imagine if everyone's shoes were made of that. Everyone would be recycling those plastic bottles to get new shoes. That's a small weak signal. But what about a big one? What about Mike Cannon-Brookes, the founder of Atlassian, giving everyone his transformative future for Australia, which is, what if we powered 500% of our power needs with renewable energy? What if we could do that? Then we could be a global exporter of solar power. Like, how cool would that be? So I encourage you to kind of go out and try and find those little glimpses of transformative futures and then put them in your little futures bank. Keep building that picture. But also share it, cross-pollinate it with everybody else, because I bet everybody else has his own kind of other little ideas. And transformative ideas are contagious. And this is really the way that we battle continual growth, that kind of continual growth story. And then we can also battle that continual growth story within ourselves. So every time we think we need more, we think we need more stuff, we can kind of stop and ask ourselves, do we? Is that really what will make us happy? Or is it something else? Is it adventure or belonging or love? Like, maybe it's something different. Now, empathy with our future selves. So, to do this, we need to remind ourselves that in the future, we're still going to be us. We're still going to make mistakes. We're still going to have problems. We're still going to like pineapple on pizza. But it's probably also helpful for us to kind of have a little bit of empathy with our current self. I mean, it's hard living in times that are this uncertain, and it's really hard when the stories are changing. So I would encourage you to think about yourself as being a protagonist in an adventure story. Because if we think about it, the hero in an adventure story, they go on this adventure not knowing whether they're going to succeed or not. They do it anyway. And they do it because they love something and it's worth fighting for. And I bet that every single one of you in the audience has done something ridiculous for love. I know I have. I've crossed continents, I've sacrificed my body and my wants. I've done lots of things for things that I love, and I can do it again. And here's the other thing, you don't have to do it alone, because everyone here, look around the room, I mean, all these people who are sitting here with you, they feel the same way. We're not doing it alone. The other thing to remember about an adventure story is that when a hero is scarred from battle, they don't give up, they regroup. They get more knowledge, they get more wisdom, they get more people, and they try again. But also sometimes it's hard to battle all the time, and that's when they build. And now you know what to build because you're seeing that transformative future in your mind. So we've counted our 2 ways that we're bad at thinking about the future, but I have one more trick up my sleeve. So remember how I said that we prioritise the experiential over the analytical? Well, this is where the experiential futurist bit comes in. So my work as an experiential futurist means that I create things that will help people feel their futures. I create first-person experiences, whether they're stories or artifacts or exhibitions or experiences that will help people feel something. And this is because studies have shown it increases empathy. It increases your ability to do environmental scanning, so seeing those weak signals out in the real world. And it increases your adaptability, which is what we're all going to need in the face of what's to come. I have a project called Museum of Futures. There will be a physical exhibition at Parliament House in October, but you can also visit it online. You can go to museumoffutures.com and there's a virtual gallery there and you can see it. But you don't need something fancy. You don't need a museum exhibit to do experiential futures. In fact, we're going to do it right now. So, would everyone like to get out their phones? Get out your phone if you have it. I know, in a talk I'm saying get out your phone. Okay, get out your phone and I want you to imagine that in the future, this phone is made of plants. I know, you're all thinking, oh my God, she's completely crazy. But am I crazy? Because inside plants, there's a very intricate vascular circuitry. And researchers in Sweden have actually been able to use this to grow the starts of conductive wiring to power communication and electronic systems, right? It's not outside the realm of possibility. So I want you to, when you look at your phone, when you pick it up, which I think the statistics are on average 96 times a day, yep, that's embarrassing, I want you to think about your transformative future. I want you to think, what else could be in it? And then I want you to think, given my special skills, how would I build this? Now, I'm a chatterbox. I love the sound of my own voice, which is probably why I'm here. So this is my thing that I'm doing, and I like building things. But what are you going to do? What are you good at that can contribute to this transformative future? Okay, so I've asked you guys to do a lot of thinking about the future, but I haven't shared my vision of the future, which I think is a bit rude, so I'm going to do it now. So I'm going to use this banner here as an example of a new exhibit in the 2050 Museum of Futures. This banner was from a talk presented in 2021 by Claire Marshall. The talk was perhaps unremarkable, but what happened afterwards was indeed remarkable. Because in the audience just so happened to be one person who was on the team that made Australia a global solar superpower. There happened to be two people that were key voices in the fight to ban plastics, single-use plastics, in fact, all plastics. Let's just get rid of all plastics and shop locally. And there were three people who went on to become politicians and were in the majority that voted to include a policy that meant that every single policy that they would ever look at had to take into account the impacts on the climate. But perhaps the biggest impact came from the other people in the audience who went away and led different lives, believing and working towards a transformative future, who maybe got solar powers for their house or had left stuff or were just brave enough to talk to their neighbours and friends and say, I love this planet and I want to fight to save it. Will you join me? Thank you. You've been a great audience.